Imagine. A fire alarm goes off in a building. The sensor shows a rise in temperature. But when you look around, you see flames in one part of the building, smoke in another, and someone just making coffee on the third floor. The alarm signal is real. But what exactly is burning? And is the right decision to call in bombers instead of firefighters? That's exactly what the current situation around Nigeria looks like. President Trump announced that he had ordered the Pentagon to begin planning a possible military operation, accusing the Nigerian government of failing to stop the persecution of Christians. According to human rights organizations, thousands of Christians die in Nigeria every year, and Open Doors reports that nearly 70% of all Christian deaths worldwide occur in this country. These are horrifying numbers. They're real. People are truly dying. But the question isn't whether violence is happening. The question is, what exactly is happening, why it's happening, and what can actually help. Because when you misdiagnose a problem, you get the wrong solutions, and in geopolitics, such mistakes cost lives. Since President Bola Tinubu came to power in 2023, more than 10,000 people have been killed, hundreds kidnapped, and over 3 million displaced from their homes. In just the first 7 months of 2025, more than 7,000 Christians were killed, an average of 35 deaths per day. This isn't statistics. It's tragedy. Every number is a person with a name, a family, dreams. Senator Ted Cruz claims that since 2009, over 50,000 Christians in Nigeria have been killed, and more than 20,000 churches and Christian schools destroyed. Even if those numbers are exaggerated, even if the real figures are half that, it's still a catastrophe. And that's where the complexity begins. Data shows that between 2020 and 2025, there were at least 389 incidents of violence against Christians, with 318 deaths, but also 197 attacks on Muslims, resulting in over 400 deaths. That means for every Christian killed, more than 2 Muslims died per incident. Why? Because violence in Nigeria isn't simply Christians versus Muslims. It's far more complicated. Extremist groups like Boko Haram, ISWAP, Islamic State in West Africa, and Fulani militants continue to carry out devastating attacks on Christian communities, often with impunity. They are the ones truly killing. They have ideology. They have weapons. They control territory. And yes, they deliberately target Christians. But they also attack Muslims, whom they consider not Muslim enough. They attack government forces. They attack anyone who refuses to submit to their radical interpretation of Islam. The Fulani are nomadic herders, mostly Muslims. They travel with their cattle in search of pasture. On the other hand, there are settled farmers, many of them Christians. Climate change means droughts. Droughts force herders further south. Further south means farmland. Farmland means conflict over resources. Is this a religious clash? Partly. But mostly, it's a fight for water, land, and survival. Religion becomes a marker dividing groups, but not the root cause. The country has long faced danger from multiple directions, including the extremist group Boko Haram, which seeks to impose its radical version of Islamic law. The Nigerian state is weak, it's corrupt. Its security forces are ineffective. They can't control the territory, especially in the north. And when the state can't provide security, people take matters into their own hands. Militias form. Revenge begins. The cycle of violence spins on. Nigeria's population of 220 million is almost evenly split between Christians and Muslims. This isn't a country with a small Christian minority, it's a country where 2 large religious groups live side by side, with a history of both coexistence and conflict. When you look at Nigeria through the lens of a Christian genocide, you oversimplify something incredibly complex. And simplification in geopolitics is dangerous. The president announced that he had directed members of Congress to investigate and report back their findings. He also warned that he would immediately halt all aid and support to Nigeria if its government continues to allow the killing of Christians. This is what system theorists call signal politics. You make a statement not because you expect a concrete result, but because you want to show certain people that you're on their side. Since returning for a second term in January, Trump has sought to strengthen his base among Christian conservatives in the U.S. In February, at the National Prayer Breakfast, he announced the creation of a task force to eliminate anti-Christian bias in the federal government. When Trump talks about the persecution of Christians in Nigeria, he's not just speaking to Nigerians. He's speaking to his voters in Texas, Georgia, and Florida Christian conservatives who want to see their president defending their faith around the world. Even rapper Nicki Minaj thanked President Trump for raising the issue of Christian persecution in Nigeria, praising his stance on religious freedom. It works. It resonates. People feel that someone is finally paying attention to a problem they deeply care about. But there's another audience, Nigerians themselves and other African nations. The threat of military intervention sends a message: the U.S. is ready to act if its interests, in this case, the protection of Christians, are threatened. Now comes the hard part. Because even if the problem is real, even if the intentions are sincere, the approach could be catastrophically wrong. Experts argue that claims of a Christian genocide are misleading and oversimplified. All available data shows that there is no Christian genocide in Nigeria, says Bulama Bukarti, a Nigerian humanitarian lawyer and conflict analyst. When you call something a Christian genocide, you imply a certain solution: protect Christians from Muslims. But if the real problem is terrorists killing everyone, or resource conflicts with an ethnic dimension, your solution won't work. It's like treating the symptoms, not the disease. You might feel better for a moment, but the problem stays. Nigerian President Bola Ahmed Tinubu stated that religious freedom and tolerance have been the foundation of our collective identity and always will be. Nigeria stands against religious persecution and does not encourage it. Nigeria is a nation with constitutional guarantees protecting citizens of all faiths. When the U.S. threatens military action, it undermines the authority of the local government. It tells Nigerians, your government can't protect you, so we will. But weak states don't become stronger when undermined from the outside. They become weaker. And weak states are precisely what allow terrorists to thrive. The history of U.S. military interventions in Africa and the Middle East shows a clear pattern. Short-term tactical success often leads to long-term chaos. Libya after NATO's intervention. Iraq after the U.S. invasion. Afghanistan after 20 years of war. In each case, the initial goal seemed justified. The result was catastrophic. Why? Because complex systems don't respond to force the way simple models predict. Ebenezer Obadair, a senior fellow for African Studies at the Council on Foreign Relations in Washington, agrees that the Trump administration should cooperate with Nigerian authorities to fight a common enemy. This is exactly the moment when Nigeria needs help, especially military assistance. Instead of threats, offer partnership, share intelligence, train Nigerian special forces, help strengthen law enforcement, invest in security infrastructure. It's not as dramatic as threatening airstrikes, but it works. The conflict between herders and farmers needs economic solutions. Create land management programs, invest in alternative water sources, develop markets where Fulani can sell cattle and farmers can sell crops. When people have alternatives to violence, most choose peace, not because of ideology, but because it's rational. Nigeria has constitutional guarantees for citizens of all faiths. The country has a history of interreligious coexistence. In many communities, Christians and Muslims live side by side, intermarry, and work together. Strengthen those ties. Support local reconciliation initiatives. Invest in civic education that emphasizes shared identity over religious difference. Over 3 million people have been displaced. It's a massive humanitarian crisis. These people need food, shelter, medical care, education for their children. Instead of spending billions on a questionable military operation, spend that money on refugee camps, rebuilding destroyed villages, and psychological support programs. Ideological thinking says, Christians are persecuted by Muslims, so we must protect Christians from Muslims. Systemic thinking says, in a complex, multi-layered system, multiple forms of violence occur simultaneously. Terrorists kill civilians. Ethnic groups fight over resources. A weak state fails to provide security. Different actors have different motivations. Solutions must address all these layers at once. Ideological thinking gives you a simple narrative: good versus evil. Systemic thinking gives you a complex map of interconnected causes and effects. Ideological thinking offers a simple solution: military force. Systemic thinking offers a portfolio of interventions on different levels: security, economic, social, political. There is evidence of lobbying by Nigerian separatists. Moran Global Strategies, representing the government of Biafra in exile, wrote to U.S. congressional staff in March, warning about the persecution of Christians in the country. Biafra was a short-lived breakaway state that declared independence in 1967, triggering a brutal civil war that lasted until 1970. So someone is actively lobbying U.S. lawmakers, telling them about a Christian genocide, pursuing their own political goal, separatism, the division of Nigeria. Does that mean the violence isn't real? No. But it means the way the violence is presented can be a political instrument serving other agendas. And when American politicians adopt that narrative without critical analysis, they may unwittingly play into someone else's geopolitical game. Imagine that instead of threatening military action, the U.S. did the following: launched a large-scale humanitarian program for victims of violence in Nigeria, Christians, Muslims, all citizens, offered targeted military support to the Nigerian government to fight Boko Haram and ISWAP, a joint operation, not an intervention, invested in economic programs that provide alternatives to resource conflict, supported international human rights monitoring documenting violence against all groups, not just Christians, cooperated with African partners, Kenya, Ghana, Senegal with experience combating extremism. Would that be less spectacular for domestic headlines? Yes. Would it be more effective for real people in Nigeria? Absolutely. The problem in Nigeria is real and horrific. People are dying, communities are collapsing. It's not fiction or exaggeration. The causes are complex. It's not a simple religious conflict. It's an interwoven crisis of terrorism, ethnic tension, economic competition, and state weakness. The solutions must match that complexity. Simple answers to complex problems rarely work and sometimes make things worse. Signal politics matters, but it should never replace politics of substance. And if we truly want to help Nigerians, all Nigerians, we must look deeper, listen more carefully, and act more wisely.